to the Fantasy Footballers DFS Podcast, coming to you from DraftKings Studios with your hosts, Kyle Borganoni and Matthew Betz.
Welcome in to another new year of the Fantasy Footballers DFS Podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Borganoni, once again with my bestest buddy, Matthew Betz. Betz, it's a new year and it's a new you.
New year, new me, right? I mean, yeah. Dude, this is weird. I feel like I haven't talked to you in like a month, is what it feels like. Because last week you ditched me so that you could just move across the country. So selfish of you. And I'm not gonna lie, it correlated negatively with my bankroll. So I missed you last week. I need you back in my life, Kyle, and I think the listeners do as well to help us take down this week 18 slate.
I knew we were close, but this feels even better. But the weird part is it was good for my bankroll. I did what a lot of listeners did, and I listened to the podcast. You know, I listened to you. You got to do the one on Tuesday by yourself, solo pod. It was awesome. And then you and John Daigle on the Friday podcast. I listened to that, read the articles. I was a DFS Pass subscriber while moving across the country, and I was able to cash in my lineups. So what's up with that?
I don't know, man. It seems like that always happens. Like when you're so deep in the weeds of this stuff and like plugging away on the information, it almost seems like it gets too much at times. Sometimes it's good to take a step back, find the right edge on the slate and then go from there. I think my biggest downfall in talking to Daigle, actually, and I'm not blaming Daigle by any means, but he and I were talking about that KC game, and I was like, what are your thoughts here? Like, what do you think? He's like, dude, have we seen Zach Taylor give us any confidence that he's going to let Joe Burrow do this multiple games in a row? And I was like, man, he's right. Like, when they want to, they're just going to run it with Joe Mixon. And what does Betz do? Goes full fade on the KC Cincinnati game. And there goes Jamar Chase for 3 touchdowns. Joe Burrow goes bananas. So not a good week for me in GPPs. It was fine in cash. Like, it was kind of one of those weeks where pretty much came out even. Good in cash, not great in GPPs, but that'll happen sometimes.
Yep. Hopefully you had a great week. I know for a lot of people it was Christmas, New Year's. And like Betz mentioned, I am here in Arizona at Fantasy Footballers headquarters. It's a new season of life, and so I really appreciate a lot of you listeners reaching out while I was driving across the country while my family flew out here. It's just it's a new season, and for us, we have one more week of the regular season before we get into what you and I love talking about, which is playoff DFS. It's a different kind of slate, so we do have an exciting next couple of weeks leading up to the Super Bowl. Let's quickly review this past week. And what were the couple plays you needed in cash? So Betz, your head was way further in it, which sounds terrible. Where were you at in cash, and what did people need?
Yeah, this week there's 2 priority spends on the slate, and they're honestly the same every week. It's Jonathan Taylor and it's Cooper Kupp, and on a slate like this, if you wanted to get up to those guys because they were so expensive, you absolutely had to have Trey Lance at 4,800. In a really good spot against the Texans. So he was a guy that we were on all week in the DFS pass, and most of the, people playing DFS were there too in cash. He was like 60-70% in double ups. And then as well, cheap guys that you kind of had to consider at least putting in your lineup: Braxton Berrios, Cortland Sutton, and the tight end for the Chargers, Steven Anderson, who had a blazing 1.8 points on DraftKings. Those guys were just so cheap that they allowed you to get up to those names. So it was a really common build this week as far as like who to play to be able to play up for Kupp and Jonathan Taylor, which I did. And if you didn't play Braxton Berrios in cash, I mean, certainly he buried you. I went full fade on Berrios in GPPs. I was like, look, this is a dude on the Jets, A. So that's not working in his favor. B, Zach Wilson is a terrible quarterback. C, this team has like a 16 implied total. I thought there was no way he would have success to break the slate. What does he do? Betz goes full fade in GPPs, and he just goes off. So you had to have Braxton Berrios, especially in cash.
Yes, I was fortunate enough to have him in my lineup, and a couple other names that I think were just safe plays. David Montgomery, last 2 weeks, I've been fortunate enough to play him in cash, just felt super safe, and I stacked him with the Chicago defense, which ended up going bananas against the Giants. So really it was the combination this past week of the stars and scrubs approach. And if you didn't get that, then you were kind of paying up for a lot of players, I don't know, like wide receivers in the 5 or 6K range that maybe had good medium projections, but the way your roster was constructed, you weren't able to get those high totals, especially if you didn't have the Bengals. So for me, it was the same thing you mentioned. Jonathan Taylor and Cooper Kupp were in my lineup no matter what, and then paying down at other positions allowed me to have a pretty good lineup. So I was fortunate enough in cash. Any other takeaways you have heading into this week?
I think last week, the biggest takeaway for me was trying to not get stuck on a play early in the week. Like when Daigle and I talked on Thursday for the Friday show, is when we record on Thursdays, he and I were talking, we're like, DraftKings just made a huge mistake with Antonio Brown. Like, how is he this price? And in my head, even through the week of like, didn't practice Thursday, didn't practice Friday, I just had this fear, like going into Sunday, I was like, how do I not play Antonio Brown in cash? And obviously in hindsight, like it was a train wreck based off what happened. And if you missed the news, you should not struggle to find it out there. Basically walked off the field. So that just hurt because about an hour before lock, I was off of AB because you and I were talking in Slack. We're like, man, what do you think of this ankle issue? Like, is it enough to kind of flip the coin in the other direction? And he was out there apparently like in pregame warmups looking fine. So I don't know what happened. I did play him. It was a huge mistake, obviously. So I think that's my biggest takeaway going into this week is like, don't get locked on a player on a Tuesday or a Wednesday. So much can change as the week goes on.
Yes. And week 18, which we're about to preview, it's a different thing. We talk about this every single week with DFS. You have to wipe the slate clean. You can't approach each week the exact same. So it should be fun. If you want all of our content for week 18, you want a divisional round, wildcard round, conference championship, Super Bowl. Betz is even going to put out some props during the Super Bowl that he did this past year. There's just a lot of good content left. You can go to dfspass.com, use the promo code DFSPod, and you and I just kind of get to keep this thing rolling. So just a little scheduling update. This is the last week that Betz and I will be doing 2 shows a week, but next week, we're still going to be putting out DFS pods. It's going to be once a week and going all the way through. So, stay with us, stay connected, and we love getting to be a part of your DFS winnings. Let's talk about the state of the main slate.
State of the main slate.
Each week, we refer to the lines at DraftKings Sportsbook. It's where Betz and I play. And now, here in Arizona, I play all the time. Betz, I actually set a wager on the Steelers game on the toilet yesterday, and I came out with a winner.
Nothing better than, a little multitasking. You're taking care of one thing, taking care of business. You're also taking care of business on your phone, getting these wagers in. What was the bet? Did you bet Steelers?
So I was moving the lines, man. I was on Steelers money line when it was plus money a couple days ago, and then I doubled down when I doubled down on the toilet, and let's just say that I was doing pretty well. So I came out looking pretty good on the Steelers victory, even though it was clearly an ugly game. But
dude, that is the ultimate double down right there.
I felt great about it. I almost wanted to just call my mom and tell her. But yeah, you can go to sportsbook.draftkings.com. Let's check in with a couple of wagers that we've made. I'll tell you ones that I made, and then since coming out here to Arizona, it's been even better. It's a couple of Packers wagers that you and I talked about at the beginning of the season. We said that the Packers were due to regress in a big way from just their win total. And then as the season's progressed, I've kind of gotten more and more confident. So I have some plus money on Packers to win their division. I have plus money on the Packers to win the NFC, to win the Super Bowl. And then I also have some plus ones on Matt LaFleur to win Coach of the Year. So I'm feeling pretty good about those.
Ooh, those are interesting wagers. I hadn't even considered Matt LaFleur at this point. I feel like there's a lot of really good candidates for Coach of the Year this year. So that's going to be fun to see who comes out with it. I'm going to start with one for me that's down, and this is one that we were talking about over the last day or so. Dak Prescott felt like an absolute lock for comeback player of the year. The horrific ankle issue. Dallas was supposed to be a really good team last year. Obviously, they fell apart with the Dak injury. And this year, they're headed to the playoffs. Dak looks great. Well, not so fast. Joe Burrow, what he is doing over the last 2 weeks of the season, almost 1,000 yards passing in these last 2 games, has been unreal. And we're seeing a huge shift in the market as far as the favorite there. So what I was once counting as a win, maybe not at this point. I mean, I personally think Joe Burrow probably deserves it more than Dak, don't you?
Yes, and I remember I was messaging with you, and I had to double down just to hedge my early Dak bets because Dak just felt like such an easy bet on plus money before the season. But yeah, I placed a couple of Joe Burrows recently just to make sure that I'm getting one of those two winners.
Yeah, dude, either way, that's coming away with a positive. So that's good strategy for you.
Yes, and you can follow along with all those. Betz and I will probably give out more of that content. We love doing it for the NFL draft. So if you're interested more in sportsbook stuff and just it helps you prognosticate for football in general and for DFS. So we think all of those intersect. That'll be fun for our NFL draft shows coming up in March. But let's talk about these lines this week. People, if you were interested in really high total games that are really exciting, this ain't it. In fact, I shared the totals of the slate this week with Betz for the main slate for DFS, and there is one game over the 44 total. It's the Seahawks at the Cardinals as a 48 total. It's the highest on the slate, and all the rest of them are 44 or below, including Washington at the Giants at a 38 total. So, woof, what do we do on a slate like this?
Dude, this is a big week for defenses, man. Big week for the defenses. This is a tough slate because when you look at game stacks, which is what we always talk about with correlation, we're looking for those games that can get north of 50, sometimes up to hopefully 60 points. And on this slate, truthfully, there might not be any that even get past 50. Like you said, the highest is 48, and that's Seattle and Arizona. So what I'm doing on this slate personally is trying to find onslaught stacks of teams that have a lot of motivation this week to play their starters the full game and win. And because the 7 playoff spots available this year as opposed to the 6, normally in the last week of the season, there's not that many. This week, there's actually quite a bit. And if you're in the DFS Pass, I wrote some of this stuff up in the Vegas report about teams I'm targeting with players who are projected to play because their teams need to win. And on a slate like this, you got the Titans favored by 10.5. You've got the Bills favored at home by 17 points. You've got another huge total with the Colts favored by 15 points against the Jaguars. So these are all awesome teams against terrible teams with a huge spread, but their implied total is massive. So I'm probably going to be targeting, 4, 5, 6 teams on the slate and just trying to find guys that are motivated and have a high total for their team total.
Yeah, it's picking your spots. We've mentioned this. Really, that's kind of been the trend, right, for the last month of the season has been finding these onslaught, because if you've noticed our show in general, we start off the year talking about these 50 totals, or at least 2 or 3 every single week that we were targeting and stacking. And really over the last month, we've had not even, one game that's close to 50. It's been pretty rough across the board. So it's really important to make sure that you are finding ways to get an edge over the field and just finding the right onslaught stack, because there's so many choices this week, right? We have the full allotment of games. There's just so many choices of where you could go. So last week, if people were underweight on Bengals options, then yeah, you were toast in GPPs. So you really, with so many games, need to be able to find out those options that you need. What would you say early on in the week? Arizona and Seattle is going to be the most popular and the motivation's there. Is there any other game that stands out to you as okay, I could see this getting some steam?
The one I put down here that I think is possible, it's the 49ers and the Rams. Both of these teams have motivation to win. The 49ers, while they are in a playoff spot as of now, don't have anything clinched. So they have to win to be able to get in. And then the Rams are trying to clinch the division with a win. So there's motivation on both sides. And we're going to talk about it in the salary standouts, but Trey Lance is still too cheap for, being a starting quarterback of this team. And I highly doubt Jimmy G plays. So Lance is too cheap, and anytime that you have names like Deebo Samuel and George Kittle, Elijah Mitchell, and on the other side of the ball, Cooper Kupp and Odell Beckham, there's just so many ways that you can stack this game with players we know are going to play the whole game. So it's not a huge total this week, sitting down in the low 40s as all of them are, but looking at big-time players that can break the slate in a spot where they have to win, that's a spot that I might be looking to go to in this one.
I think I'm shocked that total is so low. 44 feels low for two offenses that we believe in. I think a lot of it has to do with Lance and maybe how the game slows down. But if it were me right now, I would take the over. And if it was me, I might even place a live wager on the show as we're speaking.
Hypothetically speaking, of course.
For sure. So, that's the game that I think I like the most too. Sneaky. I'll give you a sneaky game, okay? And I know it might sound gross. It's the Titans and the Texans, okay? Now, a 43 total, you might hear that and say, oh, that's gross. That's like the 5th highest on this slate. Because there's a bunch of 44s and 40s and 42. Anyway, the Texans beat this Titans team earlier this year. I don't know if you guys remember this, but the Texans have actually played pretty well recently. And at home, remember 2 weeks ago, they did beat the Chargers. So I think that there's a couple of pieces here. Rex Burkhead's been more relevant. Brandon Cooks, we know, is solid. And then on the Titans, like last week wasn't an A.J. Brown week. I like him this week. And they have to win. Like they want to win to get that 1 seed and get the bye. So it really is super important for the Titans to be able to play their starters the whole game. So I think there could be some value there with those two teams. And it's a Donta Foreman revenge game.
Ooh, that means everything. Yeah. No, I'm with you, man. I think that makes a lot of sense, especially because, Davis Mills and the Texans have shown a willingness or at least an ability to push back when they have to. And like you said, hung 41 on the Chargers. No one saw that coming. So yeah, I like that game quite a bit, especially if it is going to come in under the radar.
Okay, which game do you feel like I don't want any part of this week?
I mean, you said this slate is bad, like as far as totals. You mentioned 38 points between the football team and the Giants, who are starting Jake Fromm. 0% chance I'm game stacking that. I could see 13-10 sort of situation. I mean, the last time Jake Fromm took the football field, the dude threw a pick, completed about 30% of his passes for like 30 yards before getting pulled from Mike Glennon. And whenever you're getting pulled from Mike Glennon, that is an all-time low. So no thank you on the football team and Giants.
Yeah, sadly, our boy Mike Glennon, and that's what I like to say. I know you guys, listeners, you love him, and I guess I'll get behind the fact that everyone likes him. I mean, it's fine. He's not going to be playing this next week. He's out. So sad times for our boy Mikey G. I will say New England and Miami. It has a 40 total. It feels like it's a defensive battle. You saw the Dolphins put up 3 points against the Titans. It wasn't pretty. So I don't mind being underweight. And it's just the ball spread around so much for the Patriots. It's really hard getting on board. There is one cash play we will talk about in a second that I feel like is an elite play this week, but I won't be stacking up that game. Who do you feel most confident hits their team implied total and goes over it this week?
Yeah, if you would have asked me this about this team, 6 weeks ago, I would have probably not answered with this team. But Seattle, over the last 5 weeks, has been pretty awesome on offense, actually. They have a 20.5 implied total taking on the Cardinals. The Cardinals are giving up an average of 25.2 points over the last 5. Meanwhile, in that same sample, Seattle is 5th highest in scoring in the league. And they've hit their Vegas total as far as the game total, not their team total, but the game total in Seattle games has gone over. And for the last 5, maybe Rashad Penny was the answer all along, man. I mean, it only took 4 years or whatever, but here we are. And like you talked about, Arizona, they're a team that they want this win. They need this win for seeding and all that sort of thing. And then Seattle, like they're just not going to let the Cardinals just walk all over them to an easy win. So I could see Seattle pushing back. There's rumors of Russ Wilson leaving Seattle. Like, is he motivated for his last potential game there? There's all these storylines that you can bake into it. But the numbers say Seattle has been better than this team implied total suggests.
I like that call a lot because it is the game at 20.5 feels a little low, especially what we just saw from Russ. I'm going to go stay in division. I'm going to go with the Rams. They have a 24.5 point team implied total at home against the Niners. I already said I like that game to hit the over, and I feel confident in their offense. San Francisco's pass defense, it's been weak. They've given up the 4th most points to fantasy wide receivers. So, yep, Cooper Kupp's going to be great once again. So I like the Rams. They are motivated. They win, and they win the NFC West. So it's an important game. So I'll take that one. And then give me a team that you are confident hits the under.
Yeah, you just mentioned, you're a little concerned about that New England and Miami game as far as being a potential fade. So let's just keep going with Miami. I mean, 16.5 points doesn't sound like a lot. When these two teams played, it was a 17-16 game. Meanwhile, Miami has gone under in 6 of their last 9, and New England is max motivation at this point. They do have a chance to still get the 1 seed, possibly. So they're motivated in this spot against Tua and the Dolphins.
I am going to say the Jaguars because you and I fade them every single week and say they don't hit their team implied total. So just expect that once again. They're a historically bad team, and Trevor Lawrence has been historically bad himself. He's leading the league in interceptions right now, so I don't really want any part of that, especially the Colts. Colts win, and they're in the playoffs, so there's a lot of motivation there. Let's talk about our favorite salary standouts.
Salary standouts.
All right, let's look at some of the names this week that you and I looked at and said, hey, on DraftKings, on FanDuel, these are the names that stand out, and these are the names that you can kind of start a cash game pool with, maybe a tournament player pool, just ones that we say, hey, put them on your radar, things could change. And I just want to say this, and you can add anything you want, Betz. This week will rapidly change. We will find out there are certain players that are on snap counts that coaches give a bunch of talk that say, hey, we're going to play our starters like Matt LaFleur, and you can just kind of go, no, you're not. So he's not. There's just no way.
You are a liar.
So we have to kind of calibrate the way that we look at certain players and go for guaranteed touches. Like, I know this team's in it. I know this player is a good salary standout. Like Dave Montgomery, it's like, okay, he's going to be the dude probably. He's solid. He's been getting the work. We feel like they're going to be, playing him for most of the game. Those kind of players, you just can get guaranteed volume. So anything you want to say about Week 18 and just the weird place that it is?
It is weird. That is for sure. I think there's a huge edge in Week 18, and really that's because if you're plugged into understanding these motivation situations, not only for the teams, but there's also, I think maybe it's not everything that I'm going to bake into what's going on, but there's certain player motivations for contract bonuses, for milestones, for things like that. So use that, I think, too, and we'll probably have that content up either in the DFS Pass or we'll talk about it in the next show. But basically, that's another factor to consider in Week 18. And if you're plugged into those sort of things, especially the playing time, I think there's a pretty big edge this week. I remember last year in Week 17 was one of my better weeks in DFS because of that and understanding how this slate is just so different.
For sure. And looking at quarterback, it's almost like we can just press copy and paste from last week. Like the same values that are there are not priced up nearly enough. So Trey Lance, 5.5K feels like he is too easy to put in your lineup. Like last week, 4.8 was a steal. We said, why would you go anywhere else in cash? Do you feel like he's the easiest play this week?
I think probably right now, based off how the slate looks, especially considering that there's two guys that we want to try to find a way to play one of them, and Jonathan Taylor at 9.3 or Cooper Kupp at 9.7, and maybe we'll get lucky and get value and be able to play them both again like we did last week. But yeah, looking on the slate, like you can't go below Trey Lance. So if you do want to save money and get up to those guys, he pretty much has to be in your lineup at this point. It seems like anyway. The matchup on paper isn't awesome with the Rams, but we know any quarterback that can run the football can really pad the stat line. And that's what he's going to do.
All right. Between him and Taysom Hill, they feel like the cash game quarterbacks that you can say they're going to get 8 to 10 rushing attempts. They're in a spot where they're going to be competitive. I mean, Saints technically have a chance to get in the playoffs as well. So do you have a lean between Lance and Taysom?
I haven't started building yet to kind of look at how things go. My early lean is just to say, like, let's take the savings and go down to 5,500 for Lance as opposed to 6.2 for Taysom. And that's just because, again, I do want to prioritize those names of Jonathan Taylor, Cooper Kupp, and cash this week.
The other name that we're going to mention is Josh Allen. I mean, they're huge favorites, right? 17-point favorites. They have the highest team implied total. On DraftKings, is 8.1. I like him just as well on FanDuel at 8.8. You can't go wrong with Allen. And if you're worried, you're like, oh, well, maybe they're going to be up. It's not going to matter. Last year, they did the exact same thing, and they destroyed the Dolphins. They put up 56 in the last week of the season. So the Bills are built a little different, and I think their passing game is due for a bounce back because, dude, they struggled against the Falcons.
I mean, it's the Falcons. Are you surprised? They're so good. No, that was really surprising. What did he throw? 3 picks last week?
I mean, you can't throw against the Falcons in the snow.
That's because they don't play in the snow. Yeah, no, it definitely was not a great performance. He was still good for fantasy, obviously, because he's going to run the football.
Right.
I'm with you, though. Like, if he gets overlooked in tournaments, I mean, playing Josh Allen double stacks is almost an auto situation for me.
I'll throw out one more on FanDuel. Matthew Stafford at 7.4. He's actually struggled in their 2 big matchups. Like, they had plus matchups against the Vikings and the Ravens, and he kind of just sputtered, but he's still value. You still can double stack him. And I think it's a good spot right there. At running back, there's a couple of values this week. Where do you want to start there?
Yeah, there's a lot that I like in that, 5K, lower 6K range. And I guess I'm just going to ask you this question. Are you going to actually click the button assuming Ronald Jones is out, assuming Keyshawn Vaughn is out, are you going to play, I wrote down here, meh Vion Bell? Because let's be honest, at this point in his career, it's meh. Like, he's fine. He'll get touches. 5K is a good tag, but am I just being biased, or like, is this a bad play, Kyle? Please help.
I don't think he'll get 15 touches. I really don't. Like, I think that they're in a position. I mean, honestly, they could, because, I mean, he's probably not even going to make the playoff roster. You know, like, it's totally possible that he's just done. But I wouldn't want to entrust. If he was 4K, then yes. But 5K isn't that crazy of a savings compared to players like Chase Edmonds at 5.8. Ramondre Stevenson, you and I are all about that this week, especially on FanDuel at 6.5. It's not that big of a savings for me.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think same thing. If he was cheaper, sure. It's just, I mean, like, there is a scenario that you look at and you say, okay, the Bucs have a huge total. He's going to catch passes from Tom Brady. You know, there's no AB now. There's still no Godwin. There's no Leonard Fournette. What if there's no Rojo? Like,
there's no Antonio Brown.
He's got to project. Yeah, good God. He's going to project well, I think, but I'm just so scared. So I'm already telling you right now, like, no way in tournaments. I'm going to leave the light on, maybe a little bit for cash, but I'm concerned for sure.
Okay, it's worth it at that price to be able to say maybe in cash. Jared Patterson is only $300 more. If you knew that Antonio Gibson was not going to be playing, is Jared Patterson in your lineup?
I think probably. I mean, it's a game that we're not excited about. It's got the lowest total, but like you said, if they do sit down Gibson, the Giants, I mean, at this point, have zero motivation. You can obviously run the football on them. Saw 12 carries last week, 5 targets. Like, if you're going to get 15 to 18 opportunities in a game at that tag in cash, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I loved seeing the passing down work too. He didn't have a ton of that in his profile at Buffalo in college, but yeah, I like him. I like the matchup. I like the price. So he's definitely the cheaper one that I like this week. What about Devin Singletary? I know you and Daigle talked about him this past week. He came through again with a touchdown. He saw 22 carries at 6K against the Jets. Interested?
I think based off the way you said it, you just have to be. It's the Jets, A. And B, yeah, Devin Singletary's role has just been insane these last, 2, 3, 4 weeks. He's the dude. And last week saw 23 carries. He's obviously getting work in the passing game too. Only saw a target last week, but in his prior game, 6 targets. 2 weeks before that, 7 targets. So that's in his bag of tricks as well. And yeah, I mean, at that tag, if you're going to get somewhere around 20 touches against the Jets, I'm going to play that all day.
I will be paying up probably for Jonathan Taylor yet again. 9.3 feels fine. Like, it doesn't feel way too expensive. You're going to get 100 yards, probably a touchdown against the Jags. Heavy favorites. If you knew you could lock in 20 points at 9.3, would you take that?
I think so. And I think there's probably room for even more, right? I mean, like, the Jaguars are done. They're checked out. They're on the golf course at this point. Like, it's over, right? So Indianapolis, max motivation. Jonathan Taylor, max motivation. Needs 266 rushing yards to join that 2,000-yard club. One of only, there's 8 backs currently in that club to be the 9th. So is that a huge feat for him to get? Of course. Is he going to rush for 266 yards? I don't know. But I think they're going to try to help him get there potentially. And as you said, 15-point favorites. He's going to just feast in this positive game script. So yeah, JTT seems like a priority spend.
All right, and I'll mention one more name, and you can throw out anyone else you want. But Elijah Mitchell at 6K feels too cheap still. Like, Jeff Wilson goosed this past week. Like, he only saw 12 snaps, no touches. And Elijah Mitchell feels like when he's the dude, he's the guy. I get it, the matchup's not beautiful. But if you weren't playing Lance and you wanted to get some exposure, I feel like he's just too solid. I'm probably going to be playing him in tournaments as a pivot off of Lance and a chance just to get some exposure to that game.
Yeah, I like that call as well. The other name I'll throw out is Chase Edmonds, like you talked about at 5.8. It really just comes down to, is James Conner in the lineup or not? They keep saying like he's getting close and they think he'll play, and then he keeps getting rolled out with his heel issue, which I haven't actually heard specifically what's going on with that, but it's pretty simple. If he's out and Edmonds is the dude, I actually ended up playing Edmonds in cash last week when there was a report that Conner was unlikely to play from Ed Warder. So if he's out again at 5.8 against Seattle, we love to attack Seattle with pass-catching running backs. That's exactly what Chase Edmonds does. And Rashad Penny just went absolutely nuclear in this game last week, as well as players in the past. So yeah, this game looks awesome for Chase Edmonds. If he's the only guy, I'm definitely playing him.
At wide receiver, Cooper Kupp, we're going to be talking about forever. 9.7. I mean, the 49ers secondary is laughable how they've stayed in games because they're just bad. They have the corpse of your boy Josh Norman playing for them. It's not a good secondary at all. So a 9.7. Is this almost the same thing? Like, do we play JTT and Kupp?
I mean, the tricky thing is, like, to do that, you have to have Lance. You have to absolutely punt a tight end. And you probably have to have another punt option come into the lineup somehow, whether it's from an injury or a COVID situation. It seems tough to do with the names that we have on the dock right now.
Yeah, for sure. Last week, remember, we had Berrios 3.3, Lance was 4.8. So you're probably not going to find that same value. We had Steven Anderson at 2.5. So that was how you constructed the lineup. It's tempting. I feel like the conversation might be more, who do you pick between those two? So where do you prioritize, JTT or Kupp?
Oh, man. It's insanely close. I think I lean... This might sound crazy. I think I lean Cooper Kupp.
What?
Because I feel like there's so many strong running back plays in the 5K to 6K range. And at wide receiver, I'm not sure what your thoughts are this week, but I don't feel like there's as much of a strong projected player pool in those middle kind of price tags.
Yeah, there's really not many players in the 4 and 5K range that we could fill our lineup with. So I see what you're saying. I just think Taylor's touchdown equity, Taylor's 100-yard bonus feels like almost a near lock. And Kupp's has obviously been insane. 95+ yards.
Is also a lock.
He's like a 95-yard lock. I need the 100-yard
I mean,
lock.
listen, this is what he needs. He needs 12 catches to pass Michael Thomas' record for receptions. He needs 136 yards to break Calvin Johnson's receiving record.
Dang. Okay, you're talking me into...
Against Josh Norman.
I want to play both. So we'll see later on the week when we record if there's other value at the wide receiver. There are cheap guys. Laquan Treadwell has had 4 catches and at least 50 yards in 6 straight weeks. If you knew you were getting 10 points from Treadwell at 4.4, is that like a route you could go?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I know that was on the Tuesday show for the main show. The guys talked a lot about that, of just like the floor is there. And in cash games, that's mostly what we care about, right? Can this guy give me 10 points? I think Treadwell probably can.
Okay, so I like Treadwell in that kind of 4 or 5K range. Our boy Michael Pittman at 5.9. Pity City he's still alive. His heart's beating. Carson Wentz is not. He looked really bad this past week. So you could go there, Michael Pittman. Christian Kirk at 6K. Brandon Cooks, I like a lot at 6.3. He's just a really strong projection across the board. And then if you wanted to pay up, I probably will in tournaments. Justin Jefferson at 8.1. If Kirk Cousins is back, I'm interested.
Yeah, I mean, in tournaments, for sure. Like, I'm always going to take a shot on Justin Jefferson, but I just don't think the salaries will work out to be able to spend up for him in cash. Do you kind of feel the same?
Yeah, I think he's one of those plays that stood out to me that says, I want to play him this week, and it probably will end up being tournaments. I mean, he's $1,600 cheaper than Kupp, but we know he has a similar ceiling. It's the end of the year against the Bears. I like the matchup. On FanDuel, I love Stephon Diggs at 7.7. If you're going to stack up Allen and Diggs and then maybe add someone like Gabe Davis, I feel like that's a really easy double stack and a way to get off Singletary, who's probably going to be chalk.
Yep, I'm with you. Gabe Davis, too cheap, especially he's had the role like near the end zone, so he's fine on DraftKings. But on FanDuel, where we care a lot about touchdown equity, Gabe Davis is definitely interesting, especially, just monitor the news. We'll see what happens with Emmanuel Sanders. He missed last week because of the knee issue. Yeah,
Gabe Davis went over 100 against these same Jets earlier in the year, so I like him a lot. And then, we mentioned Christian Kirk on both sites. On FanDuel, is even better at 6.2. At tight ends, you and I like the same guy. At the target share has been awesome for Zach Ertz, but tell me about his price on DraftKings, because it works well in lineups.
Yeah, he's 5.3 this week. He was the guy I really played a lot of last week at 5.2 in this like Dallas Cardinals game stack that I played a lot of. And this week, taking on Seattle, certainly you like that. And yeah, like you said, the target share is there, 27% target share since DeAndre Hopkins got injured. So you know what you're going to get with Zach Ertz. He's a guy that, I feel like I say this all the time about players, but I question, can he break the slate? Probably not. But can he give you a GPP winning performance and also be viable in cash? I think so.
Gronk is 6.3. He's a value considering, last week, 7 for 115, 10 targets. He's involved. Antonio Brown's gone. We like Gronk a lot. Tyler Higbee at 4K, I feel like it's another cash option. I don't love the punt option, so for me, it's probably going to be Ertz or Higbee in cash right now. But Higbee saw 9 targets. He went 6 for 69 this past week, so like him a lot. And then we got to talk about your boy, the Muth, on FanDuel, 5.1 against the Ravens. That's cheap. That's just too cheap for a site that is touchdown dependent, and that's what we've seen the Muth do. So I don't mind him at 5.1 there. Give me some DST names you like this week.
On FanDuel, the football team is $5,000. They are the DST1, which I get. FanDuel, they've seen Jake Fromm throw a football, so they understand. But on DraftKings, they're all the way down at 3.1 in the middle of pricing. So I don't think I'm going to play them on FanDuel, just given how popular they're going to be, especially on the site where you have to pay up for them. On DraftKings, they're in play, I think, almost certainly in cash. Probably a fade in GPPs because they're going to be so popular, but against Jake Fromm, they're going to project extremely well.
Yeah, they're easily the top defense, especially with that price. The Bills are obviously projecting great, right? 17-point favorites, 3.7 on DraftKings, 4.5 on FanDuel. They're great on both sides. And then I'll just throw out the Vikings on DraftKings at 2.9. I would play them. They're at home against Chicago. If you want to drop below that 3K range, there's really not a lot of punt options, right? I feel like the last couple of weeks, we haven't been able to just say, give me the 2.3 team or give me the Stone Min. Is there any options that you see?
As of now, not really. Maybe we get Jordan Love if Rodgers doesn't play and maybe they sit Devontae Adams, then I guess you could talk me into the Lions. They'll play hard for Dan Campbell. They're 2.4. That's really it, though, as far as where I'd be willing to go in the bottom of the pricing.
You can go to ballersdfs.com and you can play in our DraftKings League, which goes through the playoffs, Fantasy Footballers DFS Borg Betz. I did a tournament this past week. It was called the New Year's Miracle, and someone came home with a lot of cash at the beginning of the year. I thought that was a fun way to reward our listeners, so we will be releasing more of those. I've really been kind of slow since moving across the country, but I'm excited to do more of those contests, more Battle of the Borg, Battle of the Betz type contests. But go to ballersdfs.com and you can play with us. And Betz, I'm going to let you sign us out.
Oh, that sounds awesome. Yeah, dude, how could you prioritize moving across the country over these DK lineups and these contests? So, yes, there'll be more of them this week. It'll be a lot of fun. Hopefully you can play with us. Get up in the DFS Pass. We're going through the playoffs. We'll see you on Friday for the Week 18 main show.
Thank you for listening to another edition of the Fantasy Footballers DFS Podcast. Don't forget to visit us on the web at www.thefantasyfootballers.com.